Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace, page 430. During that last pre-subsidized year, after each tournament's perfunctory final, at the little post-final award presentations and dance, Eric Clipperton would attend unarmed and eat maybe a little shaved turkey from the buffet, and mutter out of the side of his slot-like mouth to Mario and Candenza, and would stand there, expressionless, and receive his outsized first-place trophy amid witheringly slight and scattered applause, and would melt into the crowd soon after and dematerialize back to wherever he lived and trained and target practiced. Clipperton, by this time, must have had a whole mantle, plus bookcases worth, of tall USTA trophies. Each USTA trophy, a marbled plastic base with a tall metal boy on top, arched in mid-serve, looking rather like a wedding cake groom with a very good outside slider. Clipperton must have been just broke out in brass and plastic, but he had no official ranking whatsoever. Since his Glock 9mm and public intentions were instantly legendary, he was regarded by the USTA as never having had a legitimate victory, or even a legit match in sanctioned play. People on the junior tour sometimes asked Tiny Mario if that's why Eric Clipperton always seemed so terrifically glum and withdrawn, and made such a big deal out of materializing and dematerializing at tournaments, that the very tactic that let him win in the first place kept the wins, and, in a way, Clipperton himself from being treated as real. All this until the erection of ONAN and the inception in Clipperton's 18th summer of subsidized time, the adverted year of the Whopper, when the USTA became the ONANTA, and some Mexican systems analyst who barely spoke English and had never even fondled a ball and knew from exactly zilch, except for crunching raw results data, this guy stepped in as manager of the ONANTA Computer and Ranking Center in Forest Lawn, North New York, and didn't know enough not to treat Clipperton's string of 6 major junior tournament championships that spring as sanctioned and real. And when the first bi-weekly issue of the trilingual North American Junior Tennis that's replaced American Junior Tennis comes out, there's one E.R. Clipperton, hometown Indiana, ranked number 1 in boys continental 18 and unders, and competitive eyebrows ascend at all latitudes. But everyone at ETA from Stitt on down is highly amused, and some of them wonder whether maybe now Eric Clipperton will put down his psychic cuirass and take his unarmed competitive chances with the rest of them, now that he's got what he's surely been burning over and building himself hostage for all along, a real and sanctioned number 1. And the Continental Junior Clay Courts are coming up the following week in Indianapolis, Indiana, and little Michael Pemulus of Alston takes his PowerBook and odd software and makes a killing on Vig in the frenzy of locker room wagering over whether Clipperton will even bother to materialize at Indy, now that he's extorted himself to the sanctioned top he must have craved so terribly, or whether he'll retire from the tour now and lie around masturbating, the Glock in one hand and the latest issue of the NAJT in the other. And so everyone's taken aback when Eric Clipperton, of all people, suddenly appears at the ETA front gate's portcullis on a rainy, warm, late a.m. 2 days before the clays, wearing a flap-frayed trench-type coat and toe-braided sneakers, and 5-day growth of armpity adolescent beard. But without any sticks or anything in the way of competitive gear, not even his Glock 17's custom-made wooden case. And he makes the cold-eyed part-time portcullis attendant from the halfway place down the hill just about lean on the intercom buzzer, pleading for entry and counsel. He's in a terrible way, is the portcullis attendant's intercom diagnosis. And rules about non-enrolled junior players being on Academy's ground are strict and complex. And but little Mario Incandenza sways down the steep path to the portcullis in the warm rain and interfaces with Clipperton through the bars and has the attendant hold the intercom button down for him and personally requests that Clipperton be admitted under a special non-play codicil to the regulations, saying the kid is truly in desperate psychic straits. Mario speaking first to lateral Alice Moore, and then to this pro-rector Cantrell, and then to the headmaster himself, as Clipperton stares wordlessly up at the little wrought iron racket heads that serve as spikes at the top of the portcullis and fencing around ETA, his expression so blackly haunted that even the hard-boiled attendant told him some of the people back at the halfway place later that the spectral trench-coated figure had given him sobriety's worst fantod so far. And J.O. Incandenza finally lets Clipperton in over Cantrell's and then Stitt's vehement objections when it's established that Clipperton wants only a few private minutes to obtain the counsel of Incandenza Sr. himself, of whom I think we can presume Mario's spoken glowingly to Clipperton. And Incandenza, while not quite strictly sober, is lucid and has a very low melting point of compassion for traumas connected with early success, and so goes to the portcullis, and the Clipperton and the two Incandenzas go at high noon up to an unused top floor in subdorm C of East House, the structure nearest the front gate, for some sort of psycho-existential CPR session or something. Mario has never spoken of what he got to sit in on, not even at night to Hal, when Hal's trying to go to sleep. But it's a matter of record that at some point first ETA counselor Dolores Rusk was beeped by himself at her Winchester home, and then her beep was cancelled, and lateral Alice Moore was beeped and asked with due speed to get Lyle up from the weight room sauna and over to East House ASAP, and that at some point while Lyle was delotusing from the dispenser and making his way with sideways lateral Alice to this emergency huddle, at some point in this interval, in front of Dr. James O. Incandenza and Mario, whose tiny borrowed head-clamped Bolex H128 Incandenza required Clipperton to consent to having digitally record the whole crisis conversation to protect ETA from the ONANTA's Kafkaesque rules on unregistered recipients of any sort of counsel at U.S. academies. At some point, with Lyle in transit, Clipperton pulls out of various pockets in his wet, complicated coat an elaborately altered copy of NAJT's biweekly ranking report, a sepiad snapshot of some way-faced Midwestern couple's wedding, and the hideous blunt-barreled Glock 17 9mm semi-automatic, which even as both Incandenzas reach for the sky, Clipperton places to his right, not left, temple, as in with his good right stick hand, closes his eyes and scrunches up his face, and blows his legitimated brains out for real and all time, eradicates his map and then some. And there's just an ungodly subsequent mess in there, and the Incandenzas respectively stagger and totter from the room, all green-gilled and red mist-stained, and, because reports of Lyle's appearance outside the weight room upright and walking across the grounds have spread and caused enormous excitement and student snapshots, it's because it was just as Lyle and L.A. Moore hit the upstairs hallway that they reeled out of the room, in a miasma of cordite and ghastly mist, that they're preserved in various snapshots as resembling miners of some sort of really grisly coal. People in the competitive junior tennis community somehow regarded it as healthy that Mario and Candenza's perfectly even smile never faltered, even through tears at Clipperton's funeral. The funeral was poorly attended. It turned out Eric Clipperton had hailed from Crawfordsville, Indiana, where his ma was a late-stage Valium addict, and his ex-soybean farmer pa, blinded in the infamous hailstorms of BS 1994, now spent all day, every day, playing with one of those little wooden paddles with a red rubber ball attached by elastic string, paddleball, with an understandable lack of success, and the tranquilized and sightless Clippertons had no clue about where Eric had even disappeared off to most weekends, and bought his explanation that all the tall trophies came from an after-school job as a freelance tennis trophy designer, the parents apparently being not exactly the two brightest bulbs in the great U.S. parental light show. They held the interment under a threat of rain in Petersburg, Indiana, where there's a budget cemetery, and himself skipped Indianapolis and took Mario to the first of his life's 2 funerals so far. And it was probably moving that Incandenza acceded to Mario's request that nothing get filmed or documented at the funeral for himself's junior tennis documentary. Mario probably told Lyle all about everything back down in the weight room, but he sure never told Hal or the moms, and himself was already in and out of rehabs and hardly a credible source on much of anything by this point. But Incandenza did let Mario insist that no one else get to clean up the scene in Subdorm C after Enfield's finest had come and peered around and drawn a chalk ectoplasm around Clipperton's sprawled form and written things down in a little spiral notebook, which they kept checking against one another with maddening care. And then EMTs had zipped Clipperton up in a huge rubber bag and taken him down and out on a wheeled stretcher with retractable legs they had to retract on all the stairs. Lyle was long gone by this time. It took the bradykinetic Mario all night and 2 bottles of Ajax Plus to clean the room with his tiny contractured arms and square feet. The 18s girls in the rooms on either side could hear him fooling around in there and picking himself up. Again and again. And the finally spotless room in question had been locked ever since with its tasteless sign, except G. Stitt holds a special key, and when an ETA junior whinges too loudly about some tennis-connected vicissitude or hardship or something, he's invited to go chill for a bit in the Clipperton suite, to maybe meditate on some of the other ways to succeed, besides votaried self-transcendence and gut-sucking in and hard daily slogging toward a distant goal you can then maybe, if you get there, live with. It was Annette House's assistant director, Annie P., who coined the phrase that Don Gately sunlights on the side. 5 a.m.s a week, whether he's just getting off all-night staff duty or not, he has to be on the inbound Green Line by 4:30 hours, to then catch 2 more trains to his other job at the Shattuck Shelter for Homeless Males down in bombed-out Jamaica Plain. Gately has become, in sobriety, a janitor. He mops down broad, cot-strewn floors with antifungal delousing solvents. Likewise the walls. He scrubs toilets, The relative cleanliness of the Shattuck's toilets might seem surprising until you head into the shower area. With your equipment and face mask, half the guys in the Shattuck are always incontinent. There's human waste in the showers on a daily fucking basis. Stavros lets him attach an industrial hose to a nozzle and spray the worst of the shit away from a distance before Gately has to go in there with his mop and brushes and solvents and his mask. Cleaning the Shattuck only takes 3 hours since he and his partner got the routine down tight. Gately's partner is also the guy that owns the company that contracts with the Commonwealth for the Shattuck's maintenance. A guy like 40 or 50, Stavros Lobokoulas. A troubling guy with a long cigarette filter and an enormous collection of women's shoes catalogs he keeps piled behind the seats in the cab of his 4x4. So like 0800 usually, they're done, and by vendor's contract still get to bill for 8 hours. Stavros L. only pays Gately for 3, but it's sub-table, and Gately heads back to the government center to take the westbound greenie back up Commonwealth to Ennet House, to put on his black eye patch mask thing and sleep till 1200 hours, and the afternoon shift. Stavros L. himself gets a couple of hours off to footwear browse. Gately very much needs to assume that's all he does with the catalogs, is browse. Then has to head over to Pine Street Inn, the biggest and foulest homeless shelter in all of Boston, where Stavros and 2 other broke and desperate yutzes from another of the halfway houses Stavros cruises for cheap labor will spend 4 hours cleaning and then bill the state for 6. The inmates at the Shattuck suffer from every kind of physical and psychological and addictive and spiritual difficulty you could ever think of, specializing in ones that are repulsive. There are colostomy bags and projectile vomiting and cirrhotic discharges and missing limbs and misshapen heads and incontinence. There are colostomy bags and projectile vomiting and cirrhotic discharges and missing limbs and misshapen heads and incontinence and Kaposi sarcoma and suppurating sores and all different levels of enfeeblement and impulse control deficit and damage. Schizophrenia is like the norm. Guys in DTs treat the heaters like TVs and leave broad spatter paintings of coffee over the walls of the barrackses. There are industrial buckets for AM puking that they seem to treat like golfers treat the pin, unlike a golf course, aiming in its vague direction from a distance. There's one sort of blocked off and more hidden corner, over near the bank of little lockers for the valuables, that's always got sperm moving slowly down the walls, and way too much sperm for just 1 or 2 guys either. The whole place smells like death. No matter what the fuck you do. Gately gets to the shelter at 04:59.9 hours and just shuts his head off, as if his head has a kind of control switch. He screens input with a fucking vengeance the whole time. The barracks' cots reek of urine and have insect activity observable. The state employees who supervise the shelter at night are dead-eyed and watch softcore tapes behind the desk and are all around Gately's size and build. And he's been approached to maybe work there himself, nights, supervising, more than once, and has said thanks anyway and always screws right out of there at 0801 hours and rides the greenie back up the hill with his gratitude battery totally recharged. Janitoring the Shattuck for Stavros Lobokoulas was the menial job Gately had landed with only 3 days to go on his month's deadline to find some honest job as a resident. And he's kept it ever since. The males in the Shaddock are supposed to be up and out by 0500 hours regardless of weather or DTs to let Gately and Stavros L clean, but some never screw out of there on time. And these are always the worst guys, the ones you don't want any place near you, these ones that won't leave. They'll clump behind Gately and watch him jet feces off the shower tiling, treating it like a sport and yelling encouragement and advice. They'll cringe and ass-kiss when the supervisor heaves himself on, to tell them to get out, and then, when he leaves, not get out. A couple have those little shaved patches on their arms. They lie in the cots and hallucinate and thrash and scream in the cots and knock army blankets off onto the floors Gately's trying to mop. They'll skulk back over to the little dark spermy corner the minute Gately's got done scrubbing the night's sperm off and has backed away and started again to inhale. Maybe the worst is that there's almost always one or two guys in the Shaddock who Gately knows personally from his days of addiction and B&E, from before he got to the no-choice point and surrendered his will to staying straight at any cost. These guys are always 25 to 30 and look 45 to 60, and are a better ad for sobriety at any cost than any ad agency could come up with. Gately will slip them a Finsky or a pack of Cools and maybe sometimes try and talk a little AA to them if they seem like maybe they're ready to give up. With everybody else in the Shaddock, Gately adopts this expression where he lets them know he's ignoring them totally, as long as they keep their distance. But it's a look that says street and jail and not to fuck with him. If they get in his way, Gately will stare hard at a point just behind their heads until they move off. The protective face mask helps. Stavros Lobokoulas' great ambition, which he goes on about regularly to Gately when they're cleaning the same barracks, Stavros' dream is to utilize his unique combination of entrepreneurial drives and janitorial savvy and flares for creative billing and finding desperate recovering halfway house guys who'll scrub shit for next to nothing, to pile up enough dollars to open a woman's shoe store in some mobily upward part of Boston, where the women are healthy and upscale and have good feet and can afford to take care of their feet. Gately spends a lot of time around Stavros' nodding and not saying really much of anything. Because what is there to really say about ambitious career dreams involving feet? But Gately'll be paying court-scheduled restitutions well into his 30s if he stays straight. And needs the work. Foot thing or no foot thing, Stavros had allegedly been clean for 8 years. But Gately has his private doubts about the spiritual quality of the sobriety involved, e.g., like Stavros gets easily aggravated at the Shaddock guys that can't get up and out like they're supposed to and clear out. And almost daily, he'll make a production of throwing down his mop in the middle of the floor and throwing his head back to scream, "Why don't you sorry motherfucks just go home?" Which so far, for over 13 months, he hasn't quit finding hilarious. His own witticism. Stavros. But the whole Clipperton saga highlights the way there are certain very talented junior players who just cannot keep the lip stiff and fire stoked if they ever finally do achieve a top ranking or win some important event. Next to Clipperton, the most historically ghastly instance of this syndrome involved a kid from Fresno in Central California, also an unaffiliated kid, His dad, an architect or draftsman or something, functioned as his coach. His dad had played for UC Davis or Irvine or one of those. All the ETA staff really emphasizes that again here was a kid without academy support and perspective, who after upsetting 2 top seeds and winning the Pacific Coast Hardcourt Boys 18s and getting toasted wildly at the post-tourney ceremony and ball and carried off on the shoulders of his dad and Fresno teammates, came home late that night and drank a big glass of Nestle's Quick, laced with the sodium cyanide his dad kept around for ink for drafting. Drinks cyanidic Quick in his family's home's redecorated kitchen, and keels over, dead, blue-faced, and still with a ghastly mouthful of lethal Quick. And apparently, his dad hears the thump of the kid keeling over and rushes into the kitchen in his bathrobe and leather slippers and tries to give the kid mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, but gets the odd bit of NaCN laced Quick in his own mouth from the kid, and also keels over and turns bright blue and dies. And then the mom rushes in a mud mask and fluffy slippers and sees them both lying there bright blue and stiffening, and she tries giving the architect dad mouth to mouth, and is of course in short order also lying there keeled over and blue, wherever she's not mud-colored from the mask. But anyway, dead as a rivet. And since the family has 6 more various age kids who, as the night wears on, come in from dates or patter down the stairs in little pajamas with adorable little pajama feet attached to them, drawn by the noise of all the cumulative keeling over, plus, I should mention the odd agonized gurgle sound, but since all 6 kids had gone through a 4-hour Rotary-sponsored CPR course at Fresno's YMCA, by the end of the night, the whole family's lying there, blue-hued and stiff as posts, with incrementally tinier amounts of lethal Quick smeared around their rictus grimaced mouths. And in sum, this whole instance of unprepared goal attainment trauma is unbelievably gruesome and sad. And it's one historical reason why all accredited tennis academies have to have a PhD-level counselor on full-time staff to screen student athletes for their possible lethal reactions to ever actually reaching the level they've been pointed at for years. ETA staff counselor is the bird-of-prey-faced Dr. Dolores Rusk, MS, PhD, and she's regarded by the kids as whatever's just slightly worse than useless. You go in there with an issue, and all she'll do is make a cage of her hands and look abstractly over the cage at you, and take the last abundant clause of whatever you say and repeat it back to you with an interrogative lilt. Possible homosexual attraction to your doubles partner? Whole sense of yourself as a purposive male athlete messed with? Uncontrolled boner during semis at Cleveland? Drives you bats when people just parrot you instead of responding? Having trouble keeping from twisting my twittery head off like a game hen's? Or, with an expression she probably thinks looks blandly deep, but which really looks exactly the way a girl's face looks when she's dancing with you, but would really rather be dancing with just about anyone else in the room. Only the very newest ETA players ever go to Rusk, and then not for long, and she spends her massive blocks of free time in her ComEd office, doing involved acrostics and working on some sort of pop-psych manuscript, the first 4 pages of which Axford and Shaw dickied her lock and had a look at, and counted 29 appearances of the prefix self. Lyle, a de-wimpled Carmelite, who works the kitchen day shift, occasionally Mario and Candenza, and many times Avril herself, take up most of the psychic slack for practical purpose among ETAs in the know. It's possible that the only junior tennis players who can win their way to the top and stay there without going bats are the ones who are already bats, or else who seem to be just grim machines a la John Wayne. Wayne's sitting low on his spine in the dining hall with the other Canadian kids, watching the screen and squeezing a ball without any readable expression. Hal's eyes are fevered and rolling around in his head. And actually, by this time, a lot of the eyes in the I-Day audience have lost a bit of that festive sparkle, though there's a certain chortle momentum left over from the film's self-felonious gentle Clipperton comparisons. The Rodney Tyne, Luria P. love rumor and Tyne as Benedict Arnold thing seems brow-clutchingly slow and digressive. Plus, there's some retroactive puzzlement, because the advent of subsidized time is historically known to have been a revenue response to the heady costs of the U.S.'s reconfigurative giveaway, which means it must have come after formal interdependence. And indeed, in the film, it does come after. But then the chronology of some of the end makes it seem like Tyne sold Johnny Gentle on his whole sino-temporal endorsement revenue scheme sometime in Oren Incandenza's first major sport year at Boston U, which ended in the year of the Whopper. Pretty obviously a subsidized year. By this time, the ETAs are eating more slowly, playing in the idle postprandial way with the orts on their plates, and people's hats are making some people's heads itch. And plus, everybody's sugar crashing a bit. And one of the really small ETA kids crawling around with a bottle of adhesive under the tables has whacked his head on the sharp edge of an institutional chair and is in Avril I's lap, crying with a desolate late-day hysteria that makes everybody feel jagged.